November 12, 1942. Richmond, California. A 441-foot cargo ship slides into San Francisco Bay. Fully built, seaworthy, and delivered in just 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. To anyone watching, it seemed like a magic trick. For centuries, building a ship of this size took skilled craftsmen 6 to 8 months. But this wasn't tradition. This was a revolution. And the people who made it happen weren't lifelong shipwrights. They were secretaries, farmers, housewives, and clerks. Most had never seen a shipyard before the war. But somehow, they had just completed the SS Robert E. Peary faster than anyone thought was even physically possible. The crowd stood in stunned silence. Something had shifted. An industrial uprising had just begun, and the old world of shipbuilding would never be the same. December 1940. Henry J. Kaiser, a 58-year-old construction magnate, signs a contract to build 30 cargo ships for Britain. He has no experience in shipbuilding, no naval background, just a resume filled with concrete, steel, and massive infrastructure projects like the Hoover Dam. Traditional shipbuilders laughed him off. Todd Bath Iron Works, one of the oldest American yards, agreed to partner with Kaiser, assuming they'd do the real work while he stayed out of the way. But that assumption was their first mistake. Kaiser's ignorance of shipbuilding turned out to be his greatest weapon. He didn't care how ships had always been built. He only cared how they could be built faster. Much faster. In early 1941, one of Kaiser's top engineers, Clay Bedford, visited a Ford assembly plant in Detroit. He watched cars being assembled in real time, moving down the line as workers installed parts at lightning speed. Bedford returned to California with a radical idea. Why couldn't ships be built like cars? Why not use assembly lines, prefabricated parts, and welding instead of the slow, traditional methods? Shipbuilders scoffed. Welding wasn't reliable, they said. Ships needed rivets. Millions of them, placed by skilled crews. But Kaiser didn't care. He had built pipelines using electric arc welding. He knew it worked. Now, he wanted to weld entire ships together. To the shipbuilding elite, it sounded reckless. To Kaiser, it was inevitable. In 1941, German U-boats were sinking Allied cargo ships faster than anyone could build them. The Atlantic was a graveyard, and Britain was starving. American shipyards were taking 230 days to build a single cargo ship. Far too slow. So when Kaiser proposed welding Liberty ships together, Vice Admiral Emory Land didn't say yes out of belief. He said yes out of desperation. He needed ships, and he needed them now. Kaiser got his contract, and in Richmond, California, on an empty stretch of mud flats, he began building something the world had never seen before. Not just ships, but a new kind of shipyard. A factory for the sea. While traditional shipyards relied on giant cranes and centuries-old layouts, Kaiser's Richmond facility looked more like a car plant. Wide open spaces, 7 parallel building ways, prefabrication zones where massive steel sections were built simultaneously, railroad tracks everywhere, cranes every 100 feet, lifting 150-ton components like they were car parts. Veteran shipbuilders called it absurd. One inspector from Bethlehem Steel said Kaiser had violated every principle of shipyard efficiency. But even he had to admit, this place was built for one thing: speed. It was ugly. It was chaotic, but worked. It was a place where unskilled workers would soon do the impossible. In August 1941, they began to arrive. Not shipwrights, not craftsmen, but everyday Americans answering newspaper ads, offering 20% higher wages and no experience required. Former housekeepers, farmers, bus drivers, teenagers, retirees. They came from every corner of the country to a shipyard that promised to train anyone willing to work. Kaiser's gamble was radical. Train workers in weeks, not years. Welding apprenticeships used to take 4 years. Kaiser's instructors needed 2 weeks, sometimes less. Each person learned just one task, like welding vertical seams or fitting deck plates, and did it over and over. It was assembly line logic applied to shipbuilding. It wasn't glamorous, but worked. The first Liberty ship built by Kaiser took 197 days, a little faster than tradition. Then the second took 169 days. The 5th took 128. Then came 97. Then 70. Month by month, the build time fell. By spring 1942, Liberty ships were rolling out of Richmond faster than any naval yard had ever imagined. Competitors were stunned. How could untrained workers build ships as fast as master craftsmen? The answer was simple. They didn't build ships the old way. They didn't even think of it as shipbuilding. They thought of it as assembly. Sections were welded in parallel across the yard, bows, sterns, bulkheads, and engines, then craned into place and fused together. In traditional shipyards, everything happened one step at a time. First the hull, then the engine room, then the engine. Weeks, months, sometimes years. But at Kaiser's yard, everything happened at once. While one crew welded a bow section, another assembled the engine in a separate building. When both were ready, the engine was dropped directly into the hull, fully built. Weeks of work were collapsed into hours. In one stunning example, Richmond crews installed a 140-ton engine in just 8 hours. Old-school yards needed 3 weeks for the same job. The numbers didn't lie. Kaiser's system wasn't just faster, it was radically more efficient. By late 1942, Kaiser's yards weren't just competing with tradition. They were competing with each other. His son Edgar ran the Portland, Oregon yard. Clay Bedford ran Richmond. Both wanted to break records. Newspapers published build times like sports scores. Workers compared ship counts like home runs. The pressure was intense, but so was the pride. In September 1942, Oregon shattered expectations by completing the Joseph N. Teal in just 10 days. 10 days. It was a stunt, but it proved what Kaiser had said all along. Speed was not the enemy of quality. It was the future. Vice Admiral Land, head of the Maritime Commission, visited Richmond in November 1942. Casually, he remarked that Liberty ship construction was improving, but it still wasn't as fast as other industries. Clay Bedford heard the comment and took it as a personal challenge. What if Richmond could build a complete ship in under 5 days? Not 10. 5. Land agreed, on one condition: it couldn't interfere with regular operations. Bedford accepted. The 47th hull at Yard No. 2 would be the attempt. It would be named the SS Robert E. Peary. Every piece would be prefabricated. Every shift carefully timed. Over 1,000 workers prepared for the most ambitious build in maritime history. The keel of the SS Robert E. Peary was laid just after midnight on November 8, 1942. But the real work had started long before. Every component had already been welded, tested, and staged. The bow section alone, over 50 pieces, was pre-assembled and waiting. The engine, a 140-ton steam plant, was tested off-site and mounted on its foundation. Cargo holds, steering gear, deck houses, everything was ready. As the sun rose on day one, cranes were already dropping full sections into place. This wasn't a ship being built. It was a ship being assembled, like a puzzle with all the pieces already cut. Richmond Yard No. 2 ran around the clock. 3 shifts, over 1,000 workers. No breaks, no wasted motion. Crews operated like clockwork, welding one section while another was being lifted into place. Any delay risked missing the target time. Reporters circled the site. Admirals waited nervously. Competing shipbuilders whispered about shortcuts, assuming the vessel would be a hollow stunt. But as each hour passed, the ship came together. By day 4, the hull was complete. Deck secured. Engine installed. Steering gear functioning. Most ships took 4 days just to prepare the hull. At 3:30 p.m. on November 12th, just 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes after the keel was laid, the SS Robert Peary slid down the launch rails into San Francisco Bay. The crowd gasped. The ship wasn't a prop. It wasn't hollow. It was complete and seaworthy. Military officials, shipyard executives, and journalists who had doubted Kaiser stood in stunned silence. Vice Admiral Land gave a short speech caught on newsreel. 6 months ago, I would have called this impossible. Henry Kaiser has made traditional wisdom obsolete. The revolution wasn't theoretical anymore. It had just launched into open water. In the weeks after the Peary launched, The reaction from traditional shipyards was swift and panicked. Executives from New York Shipbuilding, Bethlehem Steel, and Newport News began visiting Richmond. Their confidential memos revealed the truth. The old ways were finished. Kaiser's methods built ships in 1/10 the time at 2/3 the cost. Precision wasn't dead, but perfection no longer justified delay. Where tradition demanded slow mastery, Kaiser demanded results. It wasn't just faster, it was cheaper, scalable, and more adaptable. The old guard had a choice: evolve or become irrelevant. By early 1943, the ripple effects of Kaiser's revolution had spread across the country. 18 American shipyards were now building Liberty ships using prefabrication and welded assembly. Average build times had fallen from 230 days to just 42. 3 ships were being launched every day. It was more than a statistic. It was a logistical miracle. For the first time, the Allies were building ships faster than the Axis could sink them. The math of victory had changed. This wasn't just a shipbuilding story. It was a manufacturing earthquake. Kaiser's yards weren't just efficient. They were diverse in a way the industry had never seen. By 1944, over 40,000 women worked in Kaiser facilities, nearly 30% of Richmond's production force. Many had never held industrial jobs before. Now, they were welding bulkheads, operating cranes, and fitting hulls. African-American workers numbered in the tens of thousands, holding skilled and supervisory roles in an era where segregation was still the law in much of the country. Richmond, Portland, and other Kaiser towns became unexpected laboratories of social change. December 1943. Most shipyards shut down for the holiday. But at Richmond, production continued with celebration. Kaiser didn't just demand work. He understood morale. Christmas dinner was served free to every worker on shift. The city band played carols. Churches sent choirs. Kaiser himself walked the yards, shaking hands with welders and thanking them. It wasn't just a gesture, it was a statement. These weren't disposable laborers. They were the heart of America's war machine, and they were being treated like it. By 1944, Liberty ships had become so successful that a new design was introduced, the Victory ship. Larger, faster, and more advanced, it used the same principles: prefabrication, welding, and simplified construction. And just like before, Kaiser's yards led the charge. Over 5,500 ships would be built between 1941 and 1945, nearly half of them coming from Kaiser's 7 yards. The numbers were almost absurd, but they were real, and they were making a difference on every front of the war. British naval commanders visiting the U.S. were shocked. Kaiser's yards were crude by British standards. No polish, no tradition, but ships were rolling out in days. Commander Joseph Kenworthy wrote, "The Americans build adequate ships in weeks. We build perfect ships in years. And adequate multiplied by thousands defeats perfection multiplied by dozens." In short, Kaiser had proven something no one wanted to believe. You didn't need generations of craft to build great ships. You needed process, organization, and belief. After Japan surrendered in 1945, the Liberty ship program ended. Demand vanished overnight. Kaiser's workforce dropped from 200,000 to under 20,000. The once bustling Richmond yards sat mostly empty. Many assumed the revolution had ended, but they were wrong. The ideas, the systems that Kaiser had pioneered didn't vanish. They spread. Japan and South Korea, rebuilding from wartime devastation, adopted his methods in their new shipyards. Prefabrication, welding, assembly line logic. The same ideas that shocked the world in 1942 became the standard worldwide. By 1972, maritime historian John Bunker summed it up clearly. Kaiser built more ships in 3 years than America had built in a century. But it wasn't just the number. It was the how. Modular construction, welded assembly, rapid training. Every modern shipyard, whether in Korea, Japan, or Europe, now follows the path Kaiser carved. Today's container ships, oil tankers, and cruise liners are built with techniques that trace back to a muddy patch of land in Richmond, California. Henry Kaiser didn't just challenge the system. He redesigned it, and the world followed. Between 1941 and 1945, American shipyards produced 2,710 Liberty ships. That's an average of 1.8 ships every day, 7 days a week. Kaiser's 7 yards alone delivered 1,490 of them. Some were lost in combat. Some served for decades. A few, incredibly, still exist today. The SS John W. Brown is now a floating museum in Baltimore. The SS Jeremiah O'Brien still floats in San Francisco. And one ship, the Albert M. Bow, never left service. It became a fish cannery and still sits in Alaska. These ships weren't built to last, but many outlasted even the men who designed them. In traditional shipyards, apprentice ships lasted 4 years. 10 years for master status. Kaisers Vedas, trained in 10 days. Fitters, 4 to 6 weeks. It sounded insane until it worked. Workers were trained for one task, not every task. Weld this seam. Fit that panel. Repeat it until it's perfect. Specialization, not mastery, became the engine of speed. Critics scoffed until those unskilled workers were outproducing career craftsmen. The result? Liberty ships built in 1/3 the time, using 1/3 the labor hours. Some experts warned that welding wasn't reliable. And yes, a few Liberty ships suffered from brittle fractures, cracks that split hulls in cold seas. But the failure rate was just 0.11%. 3 ships out of 2,710 broke apart completely. Engineers learned fast. Better steel, better welding codes. Problem solved. The panic faded, and the progress stayed. In wartime, the goal wasn't perfection. It was performance. Liberty ships didn't need to win beauty contests. They needed to cross oceans full of U-boats and come back again. These ships were built as emergencies, designed for 5 years of service at most. But reality had other plans. Over 800 Liberty ships survived into the 1960s. Many became commercial freighters. Some carried supplies during the Korean War. Others were sold to foreign fleets, sailing into the 1970s. One even became a floating school. Another became a stationary office. These disposable ships refused to disappear. Built in days, they outlasted ships built in decades. Shipbuilding didn't just transform production. It transformed entire cities. Richmond, California, ballooned from 23,000 residents in 1940 to over 100,000 by 1943. Vanport, Oregon, didn't exist until Kaiser built a yard nearby. It briefly became the second largest city in the state. These towns were powered by welders, riveters, crane operators, and the belief that work itself could win a war. Boom towns sprang up overnight, with schools, hospitals, and infrastructure built at breakneck speed. Most faded after the war, but during those years, they were symbols of what America could mobilize when the stakes were high. With nearly 200,000 workers under his watch, Kaiser faced a challenge no shipbuilder had tackled: healthcare. Workers needed doctors, nurses, clinics, fast. So he partnered with physician Sidney Garfield to create a prepaid preventive health program, one of the first of its kind. It worked so well that it outlasted the war. That experiment would become Kaiser Permanente, now one of the largest healthcare organizations in the U.S. A healthcare model born in a shipyard that still serves over 12 million people today. The real legacy of the Liberty Ship program isn't steel. It's people. Thousands of Americans who had never touched a welder or drawn a blueprint proved they could build world-class vessels. Women, minorities, immigrants, all told they weren't skilled enough, smart enough, or strong enough. Learned to outwork, outbuild, and outproduce the experts. The shipyards gave them more than jobs. They gave them proof of their power, and that proof changed lives long after the war ended. The techniques developed in the Liberty Ship program rippled far beyond the ocean. Welding procedures became industry standards, from skyscrapers to oil refineries. Prefabrication entered housing, bridge construction, even aerospace. Operations management, the science of how work flows, used Kaiser's example for decades. Harvard Business School taught it. West Point studied it. Global companies mimicked it. The lesson was clear. When you stop assuming what's impossible, you start discovering what's actually inevitable. Professor Michael Porter of Harvard said it best. Kaiser proved industrial capacity isn't fixed. It's built on purpose. When America entered the war, it had no large-scale merchant fleet. 2 years later, it was outproducing every other nation combined. That didn't happen because of tradition. It happened because one man dared to ask, what if we stopped doing it the old way? It was a dangerous question. It led to bitter resistance. But it also led to 2,710 ships and a roadmap for how to rebuild the world. In January 1942, Vice Admiral Howard Vickery wasn't impressed. Kaiser's request to reduce shipbuilding specifications seemed reckless. Ships are not automobiles, he said. Precision is non-negotiable. But by March, Kaiser's yards were 40% faster than traditional ones. By June, they were 70% faster. Vickery's stance shifted. His notes in the Maritime Commission records read like a confession. I learned that perfection is the enemy of sufficient. Kaiser wasn't building masterpieces. He was building answers, fast, rugged, and ready. The final tally of Kaiser's achievement is staggering. His 7 yards produced 1,490 ships, over a quarter of all Liberty ships ever built. His most efficient yards could complete a ship in just 350,000 worker hours, down from 1.1 million in 1941. By 1943, 3 Liberty ships were launched every day. That's more steel moved, more cargo carried, and more ocean crossed than any other nation could hope to match. Kaiser's numbers weren't just better. They rewrote what was considered possible. During the peak of production, Richmond ran 24 hours a day. Workers came in 3 shifts. Welders wore tinted goggles under floodlights. Cafeterias served meals round the clock. Night crews got hot coffee and live music. Some even brought their kids to nap in side rooms. The pace was brutal, but morale was high. Because every worker knew what they were doing mattered. The war wasn't just fought overseas. It was being fought and won on concrete slabs with sparks flying and steel clanging. Kaiser didn't just speed up shipbuilding. He changed how military leaders thought. Suddenly, logistics planning wasn't constrained by what could be built slowly. It was powered by what could be delivered immediately. Need 2,000 jeeps overseas? Fill 1 Liberty ship. Need 400 tanks? Fill another. Ammunition, food, medicine, fuel. Entire battlefronts were fed by ships built in days. It wasn't just production. It was strategic acceleration. And it gave the Allies something the Axis couldn't counter: infinite momentum. Admiral Nimitz later said it plainly. Japan assumed America's industry was finite. They were wrong. Japan thought it could sink more ships than America could replace. That belief shattered by 1944. Kaiser's yards, combined with other shipbuilders using his methods, created a production avalanche. Liberty ships came faster than submarines could sink them. The Pacific Theater, thousands of miles of ocean, became a proving ground for American logistics. It wasn't brute strength. It was organized, repeatable, scalable power. And it won the war as surely as any bullet. What made Kaiser's system work? It wasn't just technology. It was philosophy. Instead of chasing perfection, he chased repeatability. Instead of assuming workers needed 10 years of training, he built workflows that made sense in days. Instead of controlling every detail, he empowered supervisors to adapt and workers to specialize. Instead of massive master plans, he used modular sketches and flexibility. It was messy, it was noisy, but it worked. And when scaled, it beat every other system on the planet. The maritime establishment was full of confident experts in 1940. By 1945, most had been humbled. They'd insisted welding was unsafe, that ships couldn't be built by untrained workers, that prefab construction would never float. And yet, 2,710 ships floated just fine. Kaiser's victory wasn't just industrial. It was ideological. He proved that expertise wasn't about tradition. It was about results. He didn't wait for approval. He built proof. And by the time the skeptics caught up, he was already years ahead. When peace returned, so did old habits. Kaiser's shipyards shut down. Workers were laid off. Critics assumed the Kaiser era was over. But they were wrong, because the world had seen what was possible. Shipyards in Japan, Korea, and Europe didn't rebuild using traditional methods. They copied Kaiser. They copied Richmond. Welded steel, modular construction, assembly line yards. By the 1960s, the shipyards dominating global shipping were using methods born in the mudflats of California. Kaiser's ideas moved into factories, classrooms, and boardrooms. Engineering schools taught modular design. Business schools taught parallel production. Construction companies adopted prefabrication for bridges and housing. Oil refineries borrowed welding methods. Even hospitals mimicked his team-based task training. What had started as a desperate shipbuilding experiment had become a template for modern industry. Kaiser didn't just change what we build. He changed how we think about building itself. The SS Robert E. Peary wasn't just a record breaker. It was a question, carved into steel. What if the experts are wrong? Built in 4 days. Delivered in 7. Launched in front of doubters, skeptics, and rivals, and proven real. That one ship proved you don't need to wait a generation to build excellence. You just need the will to rethink, rebuild, and risk being wrong. The Peary wasn't just a vessel. It was a revolution with a rudder, a floating contradiction to every rule the industry held dear. Before Kaiser, the myth was simple. Craft was slow. Skill took decades. Excellence meant patience. That myth died in the shipyards of Richmond. It died the moment Liberty ships started launching faster than enemies could sink them. And it died again when post-war industries realized they could build houses, cars, and even airplanes faster using the same principles. The truth was now undeniable. Tradition doesn't define quality. Systems do. Efficiency isn't the enemy of durability. It's its engine. Kaiser's ships weren't battleships. They didn't carry guns or drop bombs, but they won the war. Each Liberty ship could carry 10,800 tons of cargo. Jeeps, tanks, food, fuel. Multiply that by 2,710. That's the supply line that powered the Allied push across Europe and the Pacific. Admiral Nimitz said it best. The Pacific War was won in the shipyards as much as on the beaches. Kaiser's revolution wasn't glamorous, but it was relentless. And in total war, relentless wins. The maritime elite had centuries of wisdom. Kaiser's team had months of questions. The experts insisted you needed lineage, apprenticeships, precision. Kaiser asked, what if you just need people who are willing to try? That was the difference. He didn't try to perfect a tradition. He reimagined the problem. And when he stripped away assumptions, he saw what others missed. Speed doesn't have to mean sloppiness. Simplicity doesn't mean weakness. And ignorance? Sometimes it's the only way to see clearly. Kaiser's story is more than World War II. It's a blueprint for any crisis. Short on skilled labor? Train people fast. Need to scale? Simplify every step. Facing the impossible? Rethink the question. In a world constantly facing new emergencies, pandemics, climate change, supply chain failures, his lesson still rings true. You don't fix the future with tradition. You fix it with reinvention. The answer isn't always better tools. Sometimes it's a better mindset. Even decades later, Kaiser's fingerprints are everywhere. In assembly lines, in prefab hospitals, in how we train workers, in how we approach innovation. Every modern shipyard, every modular construction site, every Lean Six Sigma seminar owes something to Richmond. The revolution didn't end with the war. It simply became invisible. It was absorbed into the fabric of how we build, how we train, how we think. And it all began with a man the experts laughed at. The most dangerous question in any industry isn't how do we do it? It's why do we do it that way? Kaiser asked that question over and over. Why use rivets? Why follow tradition? Why wait for masters when you can train beginners? And the moment he stopped accepting old answers, new possibilities emerged. Why not weld? Why not prefab? Why not build ships in 5 days? In a world that punishes deviation, Kaiser's strength was simple. He started with dams. Then he built bridges, then hospitals, then ships. And with each new venture, Henry Kaiser ignored the rulebook and rewrote the game. By the end of the war, he wasn't just a contractor. He was a legend. Not because he was a genius, but because he trusted people. He trusted systems. He trusted that ordinary Americans, if given tools and belief, could do the extraordinary. And he was right. The ships sailed. The cargo moved. The war turned. The SS Robert E. Peary didn't just float. It challenged centuries of belief. Built in 4 days. Delivered in 7. Created by hands that, weeks earlier, had been filing papers or harvesting crops. It was more than a ship. It was a declaration. That limits are often illusions. That tradition can blind. That greatness doesn't always with a uniform of experience. Sometimes it comes wearing a welding mask and asking, what if we did it differently? The world watched that ship slide into the bay and realized